the Arizona Territory, 1873. A land of baked rock and blood-red dust, where the only law was the speed of your draw and the height of your nerve. For Alara Vance, a widow 7 months pregnant and miles from any neighbor, the law was just the whisper of the wind in her tiny cabin's eaves. She was a healer, trusting in the roots and leaves of the high desert. But the desert was about to send her a test. A storm was brewing, and in the heart of the deluge, she would find a man balanced on the knife edge of death. He was an Apache stranger, an enemy to her people. And she was about to save his life, never dreaming that his life was pledged to 1,000 others. The sky over the Chiricahua Mountains was the color of a fresh bruise, a sickly purple green that promised violence. Alara Vance pressed a hand to the small of her back, the other resting protectively over the tight drum of her belly. The baby kicked, a sharp, insistent jab that felt like a protest against the suffocating pressure of the air. "I know, little one," she murmured, her voice swallowed by the rising shriek of the wind. "He'll be back soon." But she knew it was a lie. Her husband, Amos, wasn't coming back. Not since that prospecting trip 6 months ago, when his mule had returned to their small homestead, alone. Amos, with his kind eyes and calloused hands, was gone, leaving Alara with nothing but a half-finished cabin, a thriving herb garden, and the child he would never see. She lived in a dangerous pocket of the world. This was Apache land, or at least it had been, until the soldiers from Fort Bowie, 20 miles east, had declared it pacified. But the silence of the canyons was a liar. Everyone knew the bands of the great chief Cochise, and the more volatile, ghost-like warrior named Natio Tish still moved like shadows through the passes. Alara, however, was not a target. She was a healer. She traded her tinctures and salves at the way station near Apache Pass, bales of dried comfrey and willow bark for flour and salt. She had even, on 2 occasions, left poultices on a flat rock for a local Apache band, a silent cross-cultural truce. I harm no one. I heal. The first drop of rain hit the tin roof like a bullet. Then the sky tore open. It wasn't just rain. It was a monsoon, a solid wall of water that turned her dry little arroyo into a raging muddy river in minutes. Thunder cracked so loud the cabin walls shuddered, rattling the glass jars on her shelves. Alara lit a lantern, the small flame a tiny brave star against the roaring dark. She sat, trying to sew a baby's blanket, but her hands trembled. The storm felt different. It felt angry. It was just after dusk, the rain still lashing down, when she heard it. It wasn't the storm. It was a low, guttural sound, almost lost in the deluge. A thud against the outside wall of the cabin, followed by a groan. Ilara's heart seized. She froze, the needle slipping from her fingers. It could be anything. A mountain lion, a drifter, a soldier lost from his patrol. Or she picked up Amos's old 1860 Henry rifle, its weight awkward in her hands. She crept to the door, her breath held tight in her chest. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice thin. Only the howl of the wind answered. She waited. Another sound, a scraping, desperate sound, like a boot failing to find purchase in the mud. And then, a sigh. A sound of final, bone-deep surrender. Her conscience warred with her fear. She was alone. Pregnant. To open the door was madness. But she was also a healer. Her entire life was built on the principle of fighting death, not inviting it in. With a shaking hand, she unbarred the door. She pointed the rifle into the black, slashing rain, the lantern held high. At first, she saw nothing but a churning sea of mud. Then she looked down. Slumped against the cabin wall, half submerged in a growing puddle, was a man. He was Apache. His black hair was plastered to his face, his buckskin shirt shredded and dark with a stain that wasn't just rainwater. He was unconscious, his face a mask of sculpted bone and pain. One hand was clutched tightly to his side, where the dark stain was thickest. Ilara's mind screamed, "Bar the door! He is Apache. He is the reason Amos carried a rifle. He is danger." But her eyes saw something else. They saw the labored, shallow rise and fall of his chest. They saw the bluish tint to his lips. He was dying, right here, on her doorstep. "Lord, forgive me," she whispered. She set the rifle down inside the door and bent, her pregnant belly making the movement agonizing. "Hey, can you hear me?" He didn't respond. She grabbed him under the arms. He was heavy, a dead weight of muscle and water. She pulled, her heels sliding in the mud, her back screaming in protest. The baby gave a violent lurch, as if to say, "What are you doing?" "Hush," she grunted, pulling again. "We don't let people die. Not if we can help it." She dragged him, inch by painful inch, across the threshold and onto the rough plank floor. The door slammed shut behind them, the bar falling into place with a hollow thud. For a moment, there was only the sound of the storm, the hiss of the lantern, and the dripping of water from the man's body onto her floor. She stood over him, panting, staring at the enemy she had just invited into her home. He was young, perhaps 30, with a strong, aquiline nose and a hard line for a mouth. Even in unconsciousness, his face held a fierce, unyielding pride. Then he shivered, a violent, racking tremor. The healer in Ilara took over. The fear receded, replaced by a cold, clinical focus. She grabbed her shears and her medicine bag. First, she had to see the wound. His buckskin shirt was thick. She cut it away, the wet leather resisting. What she saw made her gasp. It was a bullet wound, a clean hole, high on his right side, just under the ribs. But it was the other side that was the problem. There was no exit wound. The bullet was still inside him. Worse, the area was swollen and hot to the touch. It wasn't a fresh wound. He'd been carrying this for at least a day, maybe 2. "You've got a fever," she murmured, brushing the wet hair from his forehead. It was burning. She was in terrible, terrible trouble. She wasn't just harboring an Apache. She was harboring a warrior who had been shot, likely by a soldier or a bounty hunter. Helping him was a crime. If she were found... The man's eyes snapped open. They were black, sharp, and full of a burning, lucid hatred. His hand, impossibly fast, shot out and grabbed her wrist. His grip was like a steel trap. Ilara cried out, dropping her shears. He tried to rise, a snarl ripping from his throat, but the movement sent a white-hot wave of agony through him. He collapsed back, his face pale, but his grip on her wrist didn't loosen. They stared at each other, the pregnant, terrified widow and the wounded, cornered warrior. I am trying to help you," Ilara said, her voice trembling. He said nothing. He just watched her, his eyes taking in the cabin, the rifle by the door, and finally the pronounced swell of her stomach. His eyes lingered there. The hatred in them flickered, replaced by something unreadable. Confusion. Assessment. His grip on her wrist, ever so slightly, loosened. "You are alone," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. It wasn't a question. Ilara nodded, too scared to speak. He looked at the wound she had exposed, then back at her face. He held her gaze for a long, agonizing moment, as if searching her soul. Then He did the last thing she expected. He let go of her wrist and fell back onto the floor, unconscious once more. For 3 days, the storm raged, isolating the cabin in a roaring curtain of gray. For 3 days, Alara worked. The Apache stranger, she had taken to calling him Kone in her mind, a name she'd heard meant he is quiet, drifted in and out of consciousness. The bullet had done its work. The fever was high, a dangerous, burning heat that threatened to cook his mind. Alara was in her element. She moved with a purpose that defied her fear. She boiled water, sterilized Amos's thin skinning knife, and laid out her arsenal. Willow bark for the fever, yarrow to stop the bleeding, and a thick, dark poultice of comfrey and ground-up chaparral to fight the infection. The hardest part was the bullet. On the second day, his breathing became shallow, a wet, rattling sound. The bullet had to come out, or his lung would fill. He was awake for it. His eyes were glazed, but he was watching her. "This will hurt," she said, holding the sterilized knife over the lantern flame. "I have no whiskey to give you." He just stared at her. "You must not move," she commanded, her voice finding a strength she didn't know it possessed. "If you move, you will kill us both." He gave a short, sharp nod. She pressed her hand against his side, feeling for the lead slug. He inhaled sharply, his entire body going rigid, but he didn't make a sound. She found it, a hard lump lodged against a rib. "Hold this," she said, thrusting a thick piece of leather, an old strap from Amos's saddlebag, at him. "Bite, but do not cry out." He took it. Alara took a deep breath, said a prayer, and cut. The man's body arched off the floor. A strangled, terrifying sound was torn from his throat, muffled by the leather. His eyes rolled back, but he did not move away. Alara worked quickly, her fingers slick with his blood. She probed, found the metal, and with a sickening tug, prized the misshapen lump of lead from his flesh. He fainted. "Thank God," Alara breathed, slumping against the wall, her own body drenched in sweat. She cleaned and packed the wound, binding his ribs tightly with clean linen. She forced sips of willow bark tea between his clenched teeth. For the rest of the day and into the night, she sat by him, bathing his face, listening to his breathing, and praying. A fragile truce formed between them. When he was lucid, he watched her. He watched her grind herbs, cook her simple meals of corn gruel, and mend the baby blanket. He never spoke, but his eyes were intelligent, assessing. He was no simple raider. There was a depth of thought there, a stillness that was more intimidating than any war cry. He saw her wince as she stood up, her back aching. He saw her talking to her belly, her hand rubbing the taut skin. On the fourth morning, the storm broke. The sun streamed in, bright and unforgiving. The fever had broken with it. Kone was weak, but his eyes were clear. Alara was outside, stretching in the clean, rain-washed air, when she heard the sound of horses. It wasn't the soft, unshod sound of Apache ponies. It was the heavy, rhythmic tread of shod cavalry horses and the jangle of spurs. Fear, cold and sharp, flooded her. She ran inside. Kone was already sitting up, his hand reaching for the knife she had used on him. "No," she hissed. "Get in there." She pointed to the small root cellar hidden under a bearskin rug. "Quickly, they will hang me if they find you. They will kill you." He looked at her, then at the cellar. He understood. He slid off the cot, the movement stiff, and lowered himself into the dark, earthy-smelling hole. Alara threw the rug back over the trapdoor, scattering some dried herbs on top just as the knock came. It wasn't a knock. It was a pounding, the butt of a rifle against the wood. "Mrs. Vance, open up. This is Jedediah Thorne, and I know you're in there." Ilara's blood ran cold. Jedediah Thorne, not a soldier. Worse. Thorne was a rancher from the valley, a self-appointed Apache hunter who ran a band of rough men. He was known for collecting bounties, and he didn't much care if the scalps he took were from men, women, or children. She smoothed her apron, took a deep breath, and opened the door. Thorne was a big man, filling the doorway. He wore a dusty black coat, and his face was covered in a thick, sun-bleached beard. His eyes were small and pale, like chips of ice. Behind him sat 3 other men, all holding rifles. "Ma'am," Thorne said, his voice a gravelly attempt at politeness. He swept his hat off, revealing a sweaty, balding head. "Quite a storm we had. Mr. Thorne, what can I do for you?" Ilara kept her voice steady, her hands clasped over her belly. "We was tracking a buck, a redskin. Shot him up near the pass 'fore the storm hit. We lost his trail in the rain, but I reckon he came this way. You be in the only water for 10 miles. He squinted past her, into the cabin. "Seen anything unusual? A man? Wounded?" Ilara's heart was a hammer against her ribs. Under her feet, beneath the rug, lay the man he was hunting. "I've seen nothing but rain for 4 days, Mr. Thorne," she said calmly, "and I'd thank you not to pound on my door. I'm not deaf." Thorne's thin smile didn't reach his eyes. "Feisty. Amos always did like him feisty. A shame. What happened to him? Out here? Alone? With the baby coming?" It was a threat, veiled in sympathy. "I manage," Ilara said. "Mind if we check your barn? Make sure he ain't holed up in there? Be my guest. It's just my mule and 2 chickens." Thorne nodded to one of his men, who dismounted and stalked to the small barn. Thorne himself kept his eyes on Ilara. He sniffed the air. "Smells strange in there, Mrs. Vance." "What is that?" "Yarrow. I'm drying it. And comfrey. For my salves." She blocked the doorway with her body. "Uh-huh. Yarrow. Good for stopping a bleed, ain't it?" He took a step closer. Ilara stood her ground. "You know, harboring a hostile is a federal crime, ma'am. They hang men for it. Can't imagine what they do to a woman." "Are you accusing me of something, Mr. Thorne?" The other man returned from the barn. "Nothing, Jed. Just the mule." Thorne's eyes raked over her one last time. He seemed unconvinced. "You see anything? You send word to my ranch. That buck I shot, he's a special one. High reward. The army wants him bad. He's called Natiotish, the Great Eagle." Ilara's face remained a perfect, placid mask. The name meant nothing to her. "I'll remember that," she said. Thorne spat a stream of tobacco juice into the mud near her feet. "You do that." He mounted his horse. "A pregnant woman? All alone? It ain't safe. You ought to think about moving to town, Mrs. Vance. This land ain't fit for decent folk. Not yet." They wheeled their horses around and trotted away, their spurs jingling, leaving a silence that felt heavier than the storm. Ilara waited until they were tiny specks in the distance before she barred the door and collapsed against it, her legs finally giving way. She lifted the rug. Kone emerged from the darkness. His face was grim, his eyes burning with a cold fire. He had heard everything. "Na-tio-tish," Ilara whispered, testing the name. "Is that you? Are you the Great Eagle?" The stranger met her gaze. He looked at the bloody bandages she had wrapped around him, the empty cup from his fever tea, and the rifle she hadn't used. "My name," he said, his voice low and hoarse, is Kone. That is all you need to know. He looked at the door, in the direction Thorn had ridden. But they will be back. He did not believe you. I know, Ilara said, rubbing her aching stomach. I know. Thorn's visit had changed everything. The cabin, once her sanctuary, now felt like a trap. The fragile peace between Ilara and Kone had been replaced by a tense, shared reality. They were now accomplices. But the immediate threat wasn't Thorn. It was the wound. Ilara had gotten the bullet out, but she hadn't gotten the infection. On the 5th day, the fever returned with a vengeance. Kone, who had been regaining his strength, fell back into a shaking, delirious state. The wound, when Ilara unwrapped it, was a geography of nightmares. It was swollen, weeping, and streaked with angry red lines. She had used all her strongest herbs. The chaparral poultice wasn't working. This was a deep infection, a rot in the blood. He was dying of sepsis. No, Ilara said, pacing the small cabin. No, you will not die in my house. I will not have this. She knew of one other cure. It was a plant the Yavapai called Aishe. The settlers called it devil's claw. It was a parasitic root with a powerful purifying property, but it was rare. It grew only in the shadowy, damp crevices of the high canyons, places where the sun rarely touched. And the only place she knew of was a 2-hour ride away, up a treacherous, narrow path, now slick and washed out from the monsoon. She looked at Kone. He was muttering in his own language, Chiricahua Apache. The words were sharp, guttural, words of command. Eskiminsen? The signal? No, wait. Dadashi! He thrashed, his strong body fighting an invisible enemy. He was not just a warrior. She knew it in her bones. The way he carried himself, even in sickness, spoke of authority. Thorn had been right. She was harboring someone important. I have to go, she told the unconscious man. I have to get the root. You have to stay alive. Do you hear me? Stay. Alive. She looked at her mule. Old cuss. The mule was old, but sure-footed. To ride in her condition was a risk. A fall would be catastrophic. But to stay was to watch him die. And if he died here, what would she do with the body? Thorn would be back. She had no choice. She packed a satchel with water, a small pickaxe, and Amos's pistol. She loaded the Henry rifle and left it propped against Kone's cot, just in case. If you wake up, she said, and it's not me, use this. His eyes were closed. He didn't hear her. The ride was hell. The sun beat down, turning the wet earth into a steam bath. The narrow canyon trail was half gone, washed away by a flash flood. Old Cuss scrambled, his hooves dislodging rocks that clattered into the swollen creek below. Ilara's back felt like it was splitting in two. The baby was a heavy, low weight, and with every jolt, a sharp pain shot through her. Twice, she had to dismount and lead the mule across treacherous, shifting mud. The air was thick with the buzz of flies. She was terrified, not of Apaches, not of Thorn, but of a simple, stupid fall. After what felt like an eternity, she reached the spot. It was a narrow, dark cut in the rock, where a small spring wept from the sandstone. And there, growing in the damp shade, was the unmistakable claw-like seed pod of the devil's claw. Thank you, she wept, sliding off the mule. She scrambled up the rock face, her fingers digging into the mud, and began to dig frantically with her pick. The roots were deep, tangled, and tough. She worked, sweat and tears blinding her, until her satchel was full of the dark, knobby roots. She was about to head back when she heard the sound. A dry, rattling buzz, the sound of death in the desert. She froze. Not 3 feet from her, coiled on a warm ledge she had been about to use as a handhold, was a huge western diamondback rattlesnake. It was coiled, its head flat, its black forked tongue tasting the air. It was watching her. Ilara didn't move. She didn't breathe. Her hand was inches from the snake's strike zone. Old Cuss, sensing the danger, snorted and shied back. "Easy," Ilara whispered. Not to the mule, but to the snake. I am just passing. I mean you no harm." The snake's tail blurred, the rattle so loud it echoed in the tiny canyon. It drew its head back to strike. Ilara did the only thing she could. She fell. She let go of the rock and tumbled backward, a clumsy, rolling fall, her pregnant belly taking the brunt of the impact as she landed in the thick, soft mud of the creek bed. She landed with a splash and a cry of pain. The snake, startled by the sudden movement, struck at the empty space where she had been, its fangs hitting the rock with a dull click. Ilara lay in the mud, gasping, her heart trying to escape her chest. The snake, still rattling, slithered quickly into a dark crevice. She was safe from the snake, but she was covered in mud. Her hip was throbbing, and a new, sharp, cramping pain was radiating from her lower belly. "No," she panted, terror seizing her. "No, no, not now. It's too soon. Please, little one, it's too soon." She lay in the mud for a full 10 minutes, breathing, praying, waiting. The cramping, mercifully, subsided. It was a warning, a clear, terrifying warning. With agonizing slowness, she pulled herself up, using the mule's stirrup for leverage. Every bone, every muscle, and her very soul ached, but she had the roots. The ride back was a blur of pain. She clung to the mule's neck, letting him find the path. When she finally stumbled into her cabin, dusk was falling. Kone was exactly as she had left him, but his skin was gray. His breathing was a shallow, ragged whisper. "Hold on," she slurred, her own body shaking with exhaustion. "I have it." She didn't rest. She didn't eat. She washed the roots, crushed them with her mortar and pestle, and boiled them into a thick, black, acrid-smelling tea. The stench filled the cabin, a smell of bitter earth and potent medicine. She lifted his head. "Kone, drink." His lips were cracked. He didn't respond. She forced his mouth open and poured the liquid in, a spoonful at a time, stroking his throat to make him swallow. He gagged, but she was ruthless. She forced the entire cup of the powerful, bitter brew down his throat. Then, she collapsed onto her own bed, too tired to even wipe the mud from her face, and fell into a dead sleep. She awoke hours later in total darkness. The cabin was silent, too silent. The ragged breathing was gone. A cold dread filled her. She had failed. He was dead. She had gone through all that, risked her child's life, only to fail. She fumbled for the lantern, her hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to strike a match. The flame caught, illuminating the small room. Kone was sitting up on the cot. He was looking right at her. The fever was gone. His eyes were perfectly clear, sharp as obsidian. He was drenched in sweat, the fever having broken in a drenching flood, but he was alive. In his hand, he was holding the Henry rifle she had left for him. He was holding it loosely, but it was pointed in her direction. "You came back," he said. His voice was no longer a rasp, but a low, clear baritone. I brought the medicine," Ilara stammered, pointing to the empty cup. He looked at the cup, then at the rifle in his hands. He looked at the mud caked on her clothes, the scratches on her face. He saw, in one long, assessing glance, everything she had gone through. Slowly, deliberately, he turned the rifle around, offering it to her. But first, "You saved my life," he said. "I am a healer," she whispered, her legs weak. "You are a warrior," he corrected. He laid the rifle on the floor, a gesture of complete trust. "Now, tell me, who is Jedediah Thorne?" The question hung in the air, heavy and sharp. The power dynamic in the cabin had shifted. This was no longer a patient and a nurse. This was a man of authority, and the woman who had tied her fate to his. Ilara, her body still aching from the journey, sat down heavily. "He's a rancher, a monster. He claims this land, though he has no right. He hates your people. He hunts them for bounty." Kone nodded slowly, his face hardening. "The army pays for the scalps of my people. Thorne is a buzzard eater. He follows the soldiers, picking at the dead." "He said he shot you," Ilara said. "He said your name was Natiotish." Kone's gaze didn't waver. "He was not wrong. I was scouting a cavalry patrol moving wagons through the pass. Thorne and his men were with them. They ambushed me. I thought I had lost them before the fever." He looked at his bandaged side. "You have a good hand. The cut is clean. Thank you." A new routine settled in. Kone, or Natiotish, as she now thought of him, healed with astonishing speed. The devil's claw had purged the infection, and his natural strength did the rest. Within 2 days, he was walking, albeit stiffly. He was not an idle guest. He was silent, but busy. He saw her struggling to chop firewood and took the axe from her, splitting a week's worth with economical, powerful strokes, careful not to strain his side. He saw the broken latch on her chicken coop and fixed it with a piece of wire and a carved wooden peg. He spoke little, but when he did, it was with purpose. He asked about Amos. She told him. He listened, his face impassive, but his eyes held a deep, empathetic sadness she had not expected. On the 3rd day, Ilara found him sitting outside, carving a small piece of cottonwood. He was carving a bird, a small, perfect little eagle. "What is that?" she asked. He held it up. "For the new life. For the end." The child," he said, gesturing to her belly. "My people. We honor the child. It is the future." He offered her the carving. "He will be a strong boy." "How do you know it's a boy?" Ilara smiled, taking the smooth, warm wood. Natiotish tapped his temple. "A chief knows." The moment of peace was so profound, so normal, that the sound of the approaching horses was like a physical blow. Ilara's head snapped up. Natiotish was on his feet in an instant, his face vanishing, replaced by a cold, deadly mask. "Thorne," he said. It wasn't a guess. "He's early," Ilara panicked. "The cellar." "No," Natiotish said, his voice flat. "He did not believe you. He will not leave this time. He will tear this place apart." He grabbed the Henry rifle. "You will go to the barn. Hide yourself." "I will not. This is my home. I will not let him." "He is not here for your home," Natiotish said, moving to the door. "He is here for me. He will burn this cabin to the ground to get me. You and the child will not be in it. He'll kill you. Go. Now." His voice was not a request. It was the voice of a man used to total, immediate obedience. Reluctantly, terrified, Ilara ran to the barn, hiding in the hayloft, her heart pounding. She peered through a crack in the wood. Thorne was not alone. He had brought a dozen men. They fanned out, surrounding the cabin, rifles raised. "Natiotish!" Thorne bellowed, sitting on his horse. "I know you're in there, you red devil. I smelled that witch brew she boiled for you. You come out, and I'll let the woman live." The cabin door opened, Natio Tish stepped out. He stood on the porch, Amos's rifle held loosely in one hand. He was weak, wounded, and alone, but he stood as if he had 1,000 men at his back. He looked, Alara thought, like a king. Thorn's men laughed. "Look at him. He's half dead already, Jed." Thorn himself wasn't laughing. He was staring at the man he had hunted for months. So, the great eagle of the Chiricahua, worth $500, dead or alive. I think I'll take you dead. It's cleaner. "You are a coward, Thorn," Natio Tish said, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "You hunt women and children. You follow soldiers like a coyote." "I'm a businessman," Thorn sneered. "And you're my prophet. Boys, light it up." 2 of his men dismounted, carrying torches. They moved toward the cabin. "No!" Alara screamed from the barn. Thorn's head snapped toward the sound. Well, well, there's the little bird." He grinned, a predator's grin. "Grab her. She'll make good bait. Or maybe good sport after." 2 men broke off, running for the barn. Alara fumbled for Amos's pistol. Boom! The sound of the Henry rifle echoed off the mountains. It was faster, louder than she expected. One of the men running toward the barn crumpled, clutching his leg, screaming. Natio Tish had fired. "You stubborn fool!" Thorn roared, drawing his own rifle. "Kill him!" A volley of gunfire erupted. Splinters exploded from the cabin walls. Natio Tish dived back inside, the door slamming shut. The 2 men reached the barn. "Come on out, little mother," one of them called, his voice slimy. "Don't make us come in for you." From the cabin, the Henry rifle cracked again. Another of Thorn's men cursed, a bullet grazing his shoulder. Natio Tish was a brilliant shot. He was pinning them down, dividing their attention. The barn door burst open. Alara pointed the pistol with a shaking hand. "Get out!" The man just laughed, seeing her pregnant state. He lunged for her. He never reached her. A shadow fell over him. Natio Tish was there. Alara hadn't even seen him leave the cabin. He had bolted from the back window, circling around in a silent, impossible sprint. He wasn't holding the rifle. He was holding the skinning knife Alara had used on him. It was over in a second, a blur of motion. The man gurgled, his eyes wide with surprise, and fell. The second man turned, raising his rifle, but Natio Tish was already on him. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution. Natio Tish stood over the 2 bodies, breathing heavily, his hand pressed to his wounded side. The fight had cost him. "I told you. To hide," he panted. "They were. He's burning the cabin." They looked. Thorn and his men were firing relentlessly at the small house. One of the torches had caught. The dry wood of the porch was beginning to smoke. "This is my home," Alara cried. "It is just wood," Natio Tish said. He grabbed her arm. "We must go. To the high rocks. We can hold them there." "I can't." Alara doubled over, a sudden blinding pain seizing her. It was the cramp from the canyon, but this time it was 100 times worse. It felt different. She gasped, her hand flying to her belly. Natio Tish looked at her, his eyes widening in comprehension. He saw the grimace of pain, the way she was holding herself. "The baby," he stated. It's coming." Alara gasped as another wave of pain hit her, buckling her knees. "It's too soon. Oh God, it's coming now." Thorn's voice cut through the air. "They're in the barn. Burn it too. Burn it all." They were trapped. The cabin was burning. The hunters were outside, and Alara was in labor. The world narrowed to a pinprick of terror and agony. The smell of smoke was thick in the air, mixing with the sharp scent of gunpowder. I can't move, Alara panted, leaning against the hay bales. The barn was a flimsy defense. Thorn's men were already moving, using the burning cabin as cover. Natio-Tish's face was a mask of furious calculation. He was trapped. He could fight his way out. He was fast, even wounded, but she could not, and he could not leave her. He made a decision. He pulled Alara deeper into the barn, behind the mule's stall, which was made of thick, rough-hewn logs. Stay down. Do not make a sound. Breathe, as you told me to do. Breathe and be strong. Where are you going? He didn't answer. He took the Henry rifle, checked its load, and climbed the ladder to the hayloft she had hidden in before. He punched a hole through the shingles of the roof with the rifle butt, giving him a clear line of sight. "Thorn!" he roared, his voice booming with an authority that belied his desperate situation. The shooting stopped. "Giving up, Eagle?" Thorn's voice was gleeful. "You are a Becky, a dog!" Natio-Tish yelled. "You make war on a pregnant woman, your own kind. Even the coyote protects its den. You are lower than a snake." "Pretty words. You gonna come out, or do we come in?" Crack. Natio-Tish fired from the roof. The shot was precise. It didn't hit Thorn, but it hit the ground at his horse's feet, sending up a spray of dirt. The horse reared, screaming, and Thorn was thrown hard to the ground. "You son of a—" Thorn bellowed, scrambling for his rifle. Another shot from the hayloft. One of Thorn's men, trying to get a bead on the roof, yelped as a bullet tore through the brim of his hat. "He's up top!" "Circle him! Fill that loft with lead!" The barn roof exploded. A hail of bullets ripped through the shingles, sending splinters and straw raining down on Alara. She screamed as a ricochet whined past her head. Below, she cried out again, a low, animal sound, as another contraction seized her. It was real. This was happening. In the loft, Natio-Tish was fighting a brilliant, desperate battle. He was one man, but he was moving, firing from 3 different spots, making them think he was more than one. He was buying time. But for what? "He's out of—" "No, wait!" one of the men yelled. The Henry rifle clicked empty. Natio-Tish was out of bullets. A triumphant roar went up from Thorn's men. "He's dry! Get him now!" Natio-Tish dropped from the loft, landing silently beside Alara. His face was grim. He had the pistol Alara had dropped, and his knife. That was all. "It is time," he said. "They're coming," Alara sobbed, her body arching in pain. "Listen to me," he said, grabbing her shoulders. His black eyes bored into hers. "They will not take you. They will not take the child. I give you my word. Shinti." What does that mean?" "It means, it is my promise." The barn doors burst open. Jedediah Thorn stood there, silhouetted against the burning cabin, his face a mask of triumph. "End of the line, Eagle. And you traitorous—" He stopped. His eyes widened. He was looking past Natio-Tish, past Alara. He was looking at the small, square opening in the back of the barn, a window meant for ventilation. An arrow was sticking out of Thorn's chest. Thorn looked down at the feathered shaft in disbelief. He tried to speak, to raise his rifle, but he only gurgled. He pitched forward onto his face, dead. For a heartbeat, there was absolute silence. The only sound was the crackle of the burning cabin. Then, the world erupted. It was a sound Alara had only heard in her nightmares. A high-pitched, ululating cry, a war cry. It came not from one throat, but from 100. Thorn's men, frozen in shock, turned. They were surrounded. The ridges, the arroyo, the high rocks, all of it. Where there had been empty desert, there were now men, warriors. on horseback and on foot. They were silent, painted for war, armed with rifles and lances. They were Apache. They were all Apache. Thorne's men panicked. They broke. They ran for their horses, firing wildly. It was a mistake. The warriors descended. It was not a battle. It was a judgment. The fight was brutal, swift, and absolute. Within 2 minutes, it was over. The silence that returned was heavier, broken only by the whimpers of the wounded. Natio Tish pulled Alara to her feet. He supported her weight, shielding her from the carnage. Your people, she stammered. My people, he confirmed. He half carried her out of the barn, into the sunlight. The warriors, dozens, hundreds of them, it seemed, parted for them. They stared at Alara, their faces hard, suspicious, and cold. They saw their chief, wounded, leaning on a white woman. A man strode forward. He was older, his face scarred, his eyes holding an iron authority. He was clearly the sub-chief. He stopped, staring at Alara with open hostility. This is the one, Natio Tish, he said in Apache. This is what you... She is K, Eskaminzin, Natio Tish said, his voice ringing with command. She is family of the people. She saved my life. She pulled the soldier's bullet from my side. She is the reason I stand here. Eskaminzin's eyes widened. He looked at Alara with a new, grudging respect. The buzzard eaters are dead, Eskaminzin reported. We followed their trail. We knew they were hunting you. We thought you were dead. I was, Natio Tish said, looking at Alara. I was. But the white willow healed me. He called her White Willow. Alara held on to him, her vision blurring, the world spinning. The adrenaline, the shock. It was all too much. The debt is paid, my chief, Eskaminzin said. No, Natio Tish said, his voice softening. It is not. He looked at Alara, who suddenly cried out, a real piercing scream of labor. She crumpled, and he caught her. It is not, he repeated, his eyes meeting Eskaminzin's. The debt has just begun. Get the women. Now, the child comes. The Apache warriors, moments before a storm of silent, deadly vengeance, were now a flurry of confused activity. Eskaminzin barked orders. Several women, who had been riding with the war party, dismounted and ran forward. They were older, their faces creased like walnuts, their hands strong and capable. They saw Alara. They saw her state, and the suspicion on their faces vanished, replaced by the universal, no-nonsense competence of midwives. They took her from Natio Tish, chattering at her in a language she didn't understand, but the tone was all that mattered. It was firm, commanding, and deeply reassuring. It is all right, Sion, one of them murmured, using a term for sister. They led her past the smoking ruins of her cabin, into the shade of a large mesquite tree, away from the grim cleanup now being conducted by the male warriors. They laid out blankets, boiled water in Alara's own salvaged kettle over a fast, clean fire, and began to chant a low, rhythmic song. Natio Tish stood guard, a sentinel. He had been given a fresh rifle, and his wounds had been quickly redressed by one of his men. He was no longer Ko-Ne, the quiet stranger. He was fully Natio Tish, the great eagle, chief of the Chiricahua. The 1,000 warriors Eskaminzin had brought, a number Alara now realized was no exaggeration, as they filled the small valley, deferred to him with a reverence that bordered on awe. Alara's world shrank to the blankets, the faces of the old women, and the overwhelming primal rhythm of birth. It was hard, and it was fast. She was terrified, but the Apache women were a rock. They held her, they wiped her brow, they spoke the old strong words of their people. Words for push, breathe, life. Hours passed. The high noon sun gave way to the soft golden light of late afternoon. And then a new sound, the thin, furious wail of a new life. "It is a boy," one of the midwives declared, lifting the child. "A strong boy. He has the lungs of a warrior." Ilara fell back, weeping with relief and exhaustion. They cleaned the baby and wrapped him in the very blanket she had been sewing when the storm first hit, which one of the women had saved from the cabin. They placed him in her arms. He was perfect. He had Amos's dark hair. She looked up. Natiotish was standing over her. His face, which she had seen as a mask of pain, hatred, and command, was now something else entirely. It was soft. He looked at the child with a profound reverence. "You have done well, Ilara Vance," he said. I... She was too tired to speak. "The debt," he said, "is for 2 lives. My life and his." He knelt, a motion that must have caused him great pain, and touched the baby's forehead with one finger. "In the custom of my people," he said. "The one who is present at the birth gives the name. He was born under the sign of the eagle, shielded by my warriors. He will be called He Who Is Shielded by the Eagle." Ilara looked at the powerful, dangerous man who had just named her son. "His name," she whispered, her voice cracking, "is Amos." Natiotish held her gaze. A slow smile spread across his face. "Amos. It is a good, strong name." He nodded. "Amos. He who is shielded." He stood. The entire valley had gone quiet. 1,000 warriors watched as their chief stood over the white woman and her new child. Eskiminzin approached. "My chief, the soldiers from Fort Bowie will have heard the gunfire. They will send a patrol." "Let them come," Natiotish said. "They will find only the bodies of the buzzard eaters. We will be gone, like the wind." He turned back to Ilara. His people were already packing. The bodies of Thorn and his men had vanished. Their horses, their guns, all taken. The Apache left nothing. "We must leave," he said. Ilara's heart panicked. "Leave? But my home, it's gone." "It was wood," he repeated gently. "Your home is here." He tapped her chest, over her heart, and then pointed to the baby. "Your home is with the Enda. I have nowhere to go. You will come with us?" he said. It was not an invitation. "My people are moving south, to the safe holds in the Dragoon Mountains. You and the child will not survive here. The soldiers will come. They will ask questions you cannot answer. They will see the bodies. They will blame you." He was right. She was a traitor. They would hang her. She looked at the ruins of her life. She looked at the faces of the Apache women, who were now smiling at her, at the baby. "We will build you a new home," Natiotish promised. "A wickiup. You will be safe. You will teach our healers your white willow medicine, and my son," he corrected himself, "your son will grow up strong." He offered her his hand. Ilara Vance, the pregnant herbalist, the widow of Amos Vance, looked at the hand of Natiotish, the great eagle, chief of 1,000 warriors. She looked at her son, Amos, sleeping peacefully in her arms. Her old life was ashes. A new one, terrifying and unknown, was waiting. She took his hand. The Apache women helped her onto a gentle pony. They built a cradle board for the baby, strapping him securely. And as the sun began to dip below the blood-red mountains, the entire procession, 1,000 warriors, their chief, and a white woman with her newborn son, moved out. They melted into the canyons, leaving behind a smoking cabin, a few spent cartridges, and a silence so complete it was as if they had never been there at all. Santa Fe, New Mexico, 1896. The high desert air was dry, and the plaza bustled with a mix of Spanish, Anglo, and Pueblo traders. Tucked on a quiet side street was a shop known for its remedies, Vance Apothecary. The name was synonymous with trust. Its proprietor, Elara Vance, was now a woman in her late 50s. Her dark hair was streaked with silver, and her eyes held a profound, quiet wisdom that few could place. She was a woman who had seen the world and understood it. Working beside her was her son, Amos. At 23, he was a man of two worlds. He had his mother's steady hands and her gift for healing, but he moved with a fluid, silent grace that was not learned in a city. He was the protector of their small world, a young man who carried an unspoken history in the proud line of his jaw, in the keenness of his gaze. The bell above the shop door jingled, announcing a customer. The man who entered was not from Santa Fe. He was an Anglo, older, with a weathered face and a cavalry-cut mustache gone to gray. He wore a threadbare jacket that had once been part of a U.S. cavalry uniform. His eyes, tired and haunted, scanned the shelves, bypassing the tonics and landing on the jars of wild desert herbs, chaparral, osha root, and devil's claw. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low rasp. He held his dusty hat in his hands. "Can I help you?" Elara asked, her voice calm. I'm looking for a story, I suppose, not a cure." He paused, as if unsure how to continue. "My name is Silas Croft. I was a captain once. Fort Bowie, Arizona Territory." Elara's hands, which were grinding herbs, stilled. "We had a case," Silas continued, his eyes distant. "A long time ago, 1873, a widow, a Mrs. Vance, lived alone out by Apache Pass. Her cabin was burned to the ground. A terrible fate," Elara said softly, her face a neutral mask. "That's the thing," Silas said, leaning on the counter. "We found Jedediah Thorne and his whole gang of cutthroats nearby. They'd been ended, Apache style. We assumed Natio Tish's war party had done it, and that they'd taken Mrs. Vance. We assumed she was dead. I was the one who was supposed to run that patrol. I was late. The storm." He looked at her, his gaze sharpening, as if seeing her for the first time. "I've been retired 10 years, but I never forgot. I heard of a healer named Vance, here in Santa Fe. I thought, maybe a relative." Just then, Amos emerged from the back room, carrying a crate. "Mother, where do you want the willow bark?" Silas Croft's breath caught in his throat. His eyes snapped to Amos. He saw the young man's face, the dark hair, the high cheekbones, the piercing, intelligent eyes. He saw a bearing that was not of a shopkeeper, but of a man born to the high rocks, a warrior's poise. The ex-captain's gaze swung back to Elara. His mind, trained in tactics and observation, connected the pieces in a sudden violent flash. The name, the herbs, the story, the boy. "My God," he whispered, his face pale. "Vance. It was you. You weren't taken. You were protected. He protected you. Natio Tish." The secret, held for 23 years, was finally out, hanging in the dust motes of the quiet shop. Amos moved to stand beside his mother, his hand resting near the counter, his body tense. Elara Vance looked Silas Croft in the eye. She did not flinch. She did not deny it. She simply held his gaze, and in her eyes, he saw the whole impossible story. The storm, the wound, the birth, the debt. He saw the honor of a chief who had shielded her. "I am a healer, Mr. Croft," Elara said, her voice clear and steady. "I sell remedies for what ails the body." She gesturing to the jars. "Is there something I can get for you?" Silas stared for a long, stunned moment. He saw the strength that had saved a chief and raised a son between two worlds. He understood. This was a story that belonged to her, not to him. He slowly put his hat back on his head. He gave a short, stiff nod, not of a soldier, but of a man paying his respects. "No, ma'am," he said, his voice thick. "I realize you already have." He turned and walked out of the shop, the bell jingling his final departure, taking her secret with him. Alara let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Amos put his hand on her shoulder. She covered it with her own. Her son, he who is shielded by the eagle, was safe. Her home was secure. The white willow of the dragoons had, at last, found her peace. And that's where our story ends. In a quiet apothecary shop in Santa Fe, with a secret that bound two worlds together. The West was won, not just with rifles and railroads, but with moments of impossible courage, of debts paid in blood, and of a love that defied all boundaries. The story of Alara Vance and Na Teotish is a reminder that even in the most brutal of times, a single act of compassion can change the course of destiny, and that the word family is sometimes written in the most unexpected ink. What did you think of Alara's choice? What would you have done if you found a wounded enemy on your doorstep? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing this story with someone who needs to hear it, and, most importantly, subscribing to our channel for more true life dramas from the wild, untamed past. Thank you for listening.